What's up everyone, it's Dakota and welcome back to another Pioneer video, and today we're going to be looking at a deck that is not the sexiest deck to play in the format, definitely not the most exciting, but I think is a sign of a healthy-ish metagame, especially if a deck like this is able to thrive and have some pretty decent success in a format. So today we're going to look at Azorious Control for the Pioneer format and kind of see, its take on how it's going to tackle the format with Red-Black Midrange, Greasefang, Lotus Field, and some of the other smattering of like aggressive decks that we have in the format to kind of counteract some of those combo decks. Of course, before we get too deep into the video, I would just like to say if you're not already subscribed to the channel and you want to see more content like this, go ahead and subscribe to the channel and ring the notification bell so that you're notified when I post these videos. Also, be sure to go in the description of this video to follow two links. One of them goes to my Twitch channel. Go ahead, throw me a follow over there so you know when I go live. And there's a link in the description of the Discord server that I run. Go ahead over there, join, follow that link, all that fun, happy stuff. And so we can talk about Magic and, in general, some other stuff. I wanted to get into some more discussion type stuff about like tournament preparation and things like that. So just some things to keep in mind. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and take a look at Azorius Control. Azorius Control and Control in general is obviously one of the oldest archetypes in the history of Magic. Essentially, it's trying to play a combination of cards that try to slow down what your opponent's doing. If you're playing against an aggressive deck, you're trying to get as many X for ones, 2 for 1s, 3 for 1s, 4 for 1s, so on. And you do that in multiple ways. Obviously, the control mirrors are, to me, some of the most boring to watch if you're like a spectator up until like near the end when you kind of just start going for things and throwing haymakers and stuff like that, trying to figure out which opponent becomes the least patient. But in play, when you're one of the two people sitting at the table, the control mirrors are very much like a game of attrition and just kind of like waiting out and seeing who flinches first. So definitely, I have a lot of respect for Azorius Control as like an archetype. I have a lot of respect for the people that play it because it's never really one of the best decks to play in a format per se. But definitely, if you have a lot of format knowledge, you are very comfortable with playing the deck, and you kind of have a decent amount of like tech-ish cards for a metagame that you expect. Azorius Control can be very powerful and be very difficult to beat in the hands of a competent pilot. So, this version of Azorius Control was played by Harry13, got second place with a 4-0 finish in the Pioneer Preliminary that took place on March 28th of 2023. This version of the deck actually choosing to play Kahira, the Orphan Guard, as a companion. Of course, infamously, you can just play 0 creatures in your deck and you have access to Kahira, because technically each creature in your deck, even though it's 0, is a cat, elemental, nightmare, dinosaur, or beast card. But you essentially get a free creature. Like, this can be something that like you win the game with. In Modern, we kind of see this like played in the control decks as, just a free card that they get to play and another card they get access to, and a card that could technically like win the game, if it comes to that. But really, like, the way that this deck is winning the game, and I think the probably most important for the non-control players is like how the heck these decks win the game. And it usually comes with like the Wandering Emperor getting to kind of stick around, make like a 2/2, beef it up a little bit, maybe even make like multiple 2/2s and just kind of like protect those creatures and stop your opponent from resolving creatures. And this like board full of like 2/2s or like 3/3s, if you put like counters and stuff on them, can eventually just win the game on their own. Probably the most like fun or torturous way of winning the game, depending on when you actually, started playing Magic or had been playing Magic, is Teferi, Hero of Dominaria, the 5-mana Planeswalker that is an honorary 3-mana Planeswalker because of its +1 of getting to draw a card, untap 2 lands on the beginning of the next end step, which has been errated to up to 2 lands because there was situations where like you had 2 untap lands, so you would have to untap your opponent's land if you didn't have 2 lands tapped. Um, Getting to put a non-land permanent third from the top of its owner's library, and of course the emblem with whenever you draw a card, you exile target permanent opponent controls. This card was an absolute house in standard and continues to show up in like 1 or 2 copies in modern decks just because, again, it's a 5-mana planeswalker. It's a planeswalker that asks for a 5-mana initial investment to end up getting 2 back. And obviously, you're not able to defend it until you can untap those lands, but normally it doesn't really matter because you're finding your window to resolve this because you're going to be able to protect it on your end step, and your opponent's not going to really have a chance to do it, to do anything to it, until their next turn anyway. So this card, a win condition with its ultimate, just having your opponent just not be able to play Magic at all. Also, on top of that, like getting to just infinitely tuck Teferi because you can target it with its -3 ability, and just tuck it into your library, draw it every turn, play it, tuck it, so on and so on until your opponent eventually draws their whole deck. Really, you're never getting that point unless it's like game 3 and your opponent's hoping to time you out. But, nonetheless, it is a win condition that you can try to play for, and I think is sort of an achievement if you're playing these Azorious control decks, is to naturally like deck your opponent, which this deck is fully capable of doing. So we got the Planeswalkers out of the way. We know how you're kind of going to win the game. I guess Hall of the Storm Giants also ends the game very quick, being a 7/7, and Ward 3, making it very expensive to deal with, especially when you are able to, play your 12th, 13th, 14th land. I mean, you're playing 27 lands in the deck, and you have some of these cards like Censor that you can cycle, hitting your land drops every turn, and being able to activate a Hall of the Storm Giants and then leave up 1 to 2 pieces of interaction is not super crazy, and also just getting to tax your opponent's mana by obviously having Ward 3 on your Hall can, in fact, make it impossible, and in the best case scenario for them, put them in the abyss and force them to chump this every turn until they eventually just run out of things to play and Hall wins the game. So obviously the important thing for the control deck, you're not playing these planeswalkers on turn 1 and turn 2. You're playing them, turn 4, turn 5, so on, even later in the game too if you want to leave up more pieces of interaction if your opponent doesn't tap out or anything. So how the heck are we getting to the mid to late game with this deck? So firstly, the honorary 1 drops, you have 4 laydown arms, which is an actual 1 mana spell from the Brothers War set. You exile target creature with mana value less than or equal to the number of planes you control. Its controller gains 3 life. Obviously, getting to scale up into the late game, the more planes you play. Taking a quick look at the mana base, you're playing 4 Hollowed Fountain, 4 Irrigated Farmland, it's 6 planes, and 4 Prairie Stream. All those lands having planes as their basic land type. So just getting to play as many planes cards as you can without compromising the mana base, and just getting to make full use of laydown arms to make it sort of kind of a better swords to plowshares. And of course, swords is like a card that's like always just been played in Magic. So laydown arms is, you know, probably just as good, when you get to, like turn 5, turn 6 of the game. March of Otherworldly Light is that other honorary like 1 drop for the deck. You can exile white cards to have the spell cost 2 less to cast, and you can exile target artifact, creature, enchantment with mana value X or less. Obviously, you can pay like 2, one and yeah, a white and 1, get rid of a 1 drop, so on and so on. You are able to leave up 1 mana interaction with March of the Otherworldly Light, and of course in conjunction with like Teferi, you're able to like get rid of 1 drops. If you play Teferi on turn 5, 2s on turn 6, so on and so forth. Just a very versatile kind of catch-all removal spell that, of course, you can tap lower and just get rid of cards from your hand to like pay a higher cost if need be. Um, 2 mana, you have Censor, Dovin's Veto, Fateful Absence, and Make Disappear as, your a more 2 mana interaction. These getting more into like the counter spells. You have Censor, which, famously, counter target spell unless its controller pays 1. You pay a blue to cycle it later in the game when, no longer your opponent's not like tapping out for spells and they're getting to leave up 1 or 2 mana to, play their spells. Dovin's Veto, uncounterable negate. Obviously, the color restriction is not that bad considering we are just straight blue-white. Has tons of duels and plenty of lands that will come into play untapped on turn 2 to make this available to you if you need it to be. Fateful Absence at 1 copy. Destroy target creature or planeswalker its controller investigates. Just catch all removal for more of the problematic permanents, like really having more problems with like creature decks and stuff like that, where if they can just go wide really quickly, this is just like an efficient answer for those creatures. And of course, like getting to deal with the Planeswalker is not that bad either, which is why this card is a little bit more playable. On top of being an instant as well as something like Declaration in Stone that could like get rid of like a board full of creatures, but is obviously a sorcery at that. Finally, you have to make disappear. Counter target spell unless controller pays 2. This also, like, with Sensor is more than okay. You have some instances. Uh, doesn't look like very much so in this deck because you have some versions that play the Castle Ardenvale, which is able to make tokens so that you are able to sacrifice them to make disappear and obviously make your opponent pay 4 mana to try to resolve their spell, which more than likely will not happen. You have Absorb and Saw It Coming in your 3 mana slot. These are just hard counters. You can foretell Saw It Coming on a turn that you just have plenty of mana. You can just foretell it, and if you need to play it, you can still play it. 4 mana, obviously, for a counter is not that ideal, but if it just gets to stay there, just a 2 mana counter is a-okay. Absorb, getting you the tempo of also gaining life. Really, really good when your opponent's getting super aggressive. Just tempoing them out by countering their 3 mana spell, and of course getting to gain 3 life, or countering their 4 mana spell, whatever. And just getting to blunt some of the offense, like essentially like time walk them. They get to attack, and they maybe get in for like 1 or 2 points when they would have gotten in for like 5 or 6, overall. So just a very good counter spell. And of course, easy to cast with the straightforward mana base that we have. Uh, Going into the fours, we have Memory Deluge and Supreme Verdict. Memory Deluge kind of being the preferred option for cards like Dig Through Time, where you can pay 7 mana to flash back, which is a lot, which is like the downside of playing this over something like Dig Through Time. But the upside for Memory Deluge is that you don't have to play a bunch of cards to make your Dig Through Times like 2 mana to look at 7 cards. Deluge, like in the early to mid game, you can just pay 4 mana, look at 4 cards, put 2 in your hand. Like it's essentially 4 mana, like draw 2 cards, but you get to pick from 4 cards. And of course, like you're flashing this back, like when you either need to necessarily like find an answer right away, but are also like are not on the verge of dying. So obviously it has some of its benefits, but like Memory Deluge getting the nod over a card like Dig Through Time for the fact that like you can play it in the early to mid game and have just the option to flash it back later, and you really don't need to kind of with like the card selection slash card draw that Memory Deluge gives you. Supreme Verdict, ever since Return to Ravnica block, Supreme Verdict has been great. Still probably the Wrath of Choice. Can't be countered. Destroy all creatures. While normally Wraths probably don't need the spell can't be countered stapled onto their text box because they're going up against like a lot of like non-blue based decks and whatnot. But for like the mono blue aggro decks and some of the other decks that try to play a little bit more interaction, sort of like Spell Queller, just gets eaten up by Supreme Verdict. And again, like the mana restriction is not really that big of a drawback. Not like it's really necessarily needs to be, but the fact that it's 3 colors instead of 2 is not really that important with again the way that the mana base is set up. Of course, there's one Farewell gets to deal with not only the creatures exiling them, but also getting to interact with graveyards, artifacts, and enchantments, which of course we know from like the Rakdos mid-range decks and things like that. Even like Lotus Field, this kind of messes with just getting rid of their complete graveyard. 3 Shark Typhoon rounds it out. Of course, you can just play this as a 6 mana enchantment, and then just start casting non-creature spells, making sharks XX equal to like their mana cost. Or you can just cycle this and make one giant shark and win the game that way. I would imagine most of the time you were just cycling this, just because like the obviously drawing the card is more important. Making like a 2/2 or a 3/3 can interact pretty well with some of the creatures in the format, along with also getting to end the game once you get up to like making 4, 5, and 6 power sharks. The mana base, we kind of went over it. You have one Hall of Storm Giants as a way to win. You have multiple dual lands that have the or plains and islands. Some of the other like utility lands, like you have one Otawara and 3 Field of Ruin. Field of Ruin, like you could use this in a way to interact with like Lotus Field deck, but you have to do it with like the Thespian stage before they activated targeting their Lotus Field, because if you try to do that and then they're able to activate response, give it a hexproof, and your Field of Ruin fizzles and you're down a land. But something just to keep in mind. But Field of Ruin can mess with some decks' mana bases. And Auto War, of course, a catch-all to just about any problematic non-land permanent that exists in Pioneer as well. An easy way to kind of interact and deal with shielders and the like. Obviously through getting Thoughtseize and things like that. Sideboard, Divine Smite. This is a card from Adventures of the Forgotten Realms. Target creature or planeswalker and opponent controls phases out. If the permanent is black, you exile it instead. Of course, being just very good against like Shieldred and like just the red black, like whatever it can throw at you. Another Dovin's Veto. Rest in peace, the Stone Brain. Brimaz Kingdom of Resco is a card that kind of gets clowned on because, it was like a very powerful card at one point and then kind of gets laughed at. But like this card does apply a lot of pressure and plays defense very, very well. Obviously, being a 3-mana 3/4 is very good on its own. When it attacks and blocks, it just gets to make a 1/1. And also gets to block with like the 1/1 as well, so you can take out some like 4 power creatures. Obviously not super ideal because Brimaz is like a 4 toughness creature, but you are able to trade up when it is necessary, and then also just make a bunch of cats as well. Mystical Dispute, getting to be cheap interaction for like some of the other blue decks. Destroying him Unleashed is makes a 4/4 angel with flying and vigilance, and if it was foretold, you make X of those tokens instead. So essentially, for 5 mana, you outpace the Starnheim Unleashed, and eventually can like win the game. Just like in one turn essentially. And Regal Caracal is a card that we'd see like in some of the control decks, but just gets to make more cats. Obviously, can come in with Brimaz, make Brimaz bigger, give those other cats lifelink, and it makes it nearly impossible for your opponent to race in these situations as long as like Caracal and Brimaz, or even just Caracal, gets to stick on the battlefield. And that is Azorious control for the Pioneer format. Long-winded, but I think this deck kind of deserves it because blue-white control is kind of like off the beaten path. I think there's like a lot of decks that try to like do their thing and decks that try to stop it. And I think that's what happens in a lot of the more high-powered formats, is that you're doing something that is very powerful. You are trying to enact that game plan and do it regardless of what your opponent does. And you just have decks that are just saying like, hey, like you can try to do your thing, but I'm going to have all these efficient tools in place to try to stop you at every turn and make it nearly impossible for you to do it. And Azorius control definitely, like I said, teched out in the right scenario. If you try to like tune it more towards like aggro decks and you play against a ton of aggro decks, you're gonna be, it's gonna look like a great choice. But of course, if you also make that choice and you play against like a ton of like, say like Lotus Field combo and Greasefang and that, and you're not really equipped to like handle the graveyard or like counter like key spells and whatnot, then you just kind of fall on your face, and Azorius control looks horrible. So definitely a deck that is going to require a lot of knowledge of the format and just of what other decks are trying to do, and really try to like tech and figure out what exactly you're going to be playing against, or best prepare for, so that you're pretty well equipped to handle whatever comes your way. So that's gonna do it for me in this video. I hope you all enjoyed. If you did, please leave a like on the video. Comment down below if what Pioneer deck you want to see gameplay of. If you want to see like Azorius control, if you want to see any of the other popular decks in the format as well. And of course, follow the 2 links in the description of this video. One to the Discord server, one to the Twitch channel. Go ahead, throw me a follow over there. That's gonna do it for me. I hope you all enjoyed, and I hope to see you all in the next video.